Three times.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Uh, I'm Karen Taylor. I am the negotiations chair.
Chad Olson, EM Vice President.
Bonnie Stafford, member rights.
Cam Wingenbach, Business Services.
Ashley Evans, HR.
Kristen Damer, Assistant Superintendent.
Brandon Lennox, Superintendent.
Cassidy Bjorklund, School Board.
Dave Markwart, School Board.
Christine Berg, EM President.
Julie Reno, Research Chair.
Michelle Dunn, Secretary.
All right. Any concerns with minutes, or are we ready to sign those?
I think we're ready to sign, make that. We have Chad Olson here instead of Jim. That's not on the minutes. Oh, that's on the agenda. Sorry.
Yeah. I did.
It's been a long time since 4 a.m. I apologize.
I did fix it on our electronic agenda, but it is on some of the written agendas. Yeah. Give me a second to realize what the date was. I'm with you. I don't know. You guys, Karen and I are both a little tired. Thank you.
All right. So I think we're first this time. So the first item that we have on ours is Article 5 and Article 23, which the district presented at our last meeting, and we are ready to TA that. So I have a clean copy, and another member of the team should be able to provide a clean copy. All right. The next item that we have on the is Article 24, which was a district proposal at our last meeting for outside experience, with the addition that employees who were hired in 2020 or after and did not have this language applied to their placement may ask to review placement. A maximum of 2 years may be applied for an adjusted step placement. The request to review must be made prior to June 1st, 2026, and will be applied for the 25-27 master agreement. So the questions that we have are, if we were to remove the date of 2020 with the understanding that placement on or new placement on the salary schedule would not be retroactive. So we're not expecting you to go back and pay people back pay. But our question is, what if there's someone who was hired in 2019 and we extend this to someone who was hired in 2020 and not to who was hired in 2019? So there's that question. And then also just the help us to understand the thinking behind the 2020 and also the limitation of 2 years that can, and asking that question because there were a few people who reached out and said, I know people who have gotten credit for 6 years, 7 years. I've been working here longer. I have additional degrees, etc. And that person, because they were hired after me, received a better benefit for their experience than I did or than I have, and I've been working here longer. So if you can just explain the thinking.
So I think we have to there has to be a limit somewhere, right? We just had a speech language pathologist who retired who'd been with us since approximately 1979. So like there has to be a limit, and the language was written in a way to recognize that at this time we were having a hard time as a district competing with other organizations who would have hired these same individuals. It was recognition of an area that were short in and we couldn't compete in. It would be the same as saying if we couldn't find a specific discipline tomorrow and we decided going forward that we were going to, and I believe in your initial language you asked for this, if we looked at shortened areas and gave a bonus moving forward, and then someone got mad and said, I didn't get the bonus, and now we want to go back to everyone who's been hired prior and give them that bonus, even though at the time we didn't have we weren't in the place, or maybe we were having a hard time hiring that and they weren't it wasn't an area that we were seeing a significant shortage in, for example. I think that's a slippery slope, which is why we presented a boundary that we felt was fair in the discussion since it's a brand new benefit. The other thing I would note is that generally, these physicians in particular are given experience for all of their relevant experience. So if I'm a nurse, I'm given experience for my experience as a nurse. If I'm a social worker, I'm given experience as a social worker. This in particular was to give additional experience for things like internships or things that were adjacent to the job, not necessarily, you don't have a psychologist coming out of a hospital setting that's getting started at BA 0 or BA 1. That's not happening. Generally, and I think we'd have to look, but when I was helping with placement on some of these, you're talking maybe 2-3 years max, because you're talking about bits of internships that have happened up to that point, unless you're a person who maybe has a master's degree and has to do a full year or two of an internship prior to getting that license. That's the work we're talking about. We're not talking about people aren't getting experience that's not relevant to the job, because if you're a nurse, any nursing experience is relevant to the job. This really applies to those who are working towards the job. So you may have internships happening before you were given your license as a speech language pathologist that then you got experience for. So I don't believe that someone would have gotten 7 years that someone else didn't get, because generally internships aren't running that amount of time.
Okay. I just to clarify something else that I think I must not have said it clearly. So if you're talking about someone who goes back 27 years, like there's a limit to our salary schedule.
Mhm.
We're not asking that this be retroactive. So we're not asking you to go back to someone who was hired 27 years ago, figure in their experience, and then pay them for all the time that they would have gotten. What we would be asking for is that if there are people who are not yet at the bottom of the pay scale, that if they have additional time, like in addition to the 2 years or et cetera, that they would be able to make the move to the bottom of the scale. We're not asking for anything more than outside of what already exists in the salary schedule. And we're not asking for retroactive reimbursement of any kind, just the ability for everyone who fits in this category to move to the place on the salary schedule that they would be placed on if they were hired today. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
And I would just generically speak for the team that I believe we'd still need a limit. This was a response to a request based on language that was in here that we felt was fair. So I think we understand what we're asking, but we're also saying if there's 40 people who are now eligible that each get to move 2 steps, there's a significant cost to that, and that needs
Yeah.
to be recognized too.
And that's why my initial question was, we're wondering, like, how many people is this? Because we don't know that.
Yeah.
There was an attempt, like, like everybody take a few people and find out when they were hired, and like that's an astronomical task, obviously. So, because all we have access to is, I mean, the only way we can figure that out is on the seniority list.
Right. And I think
so-
we did a brief run of just 2020, and you're talking maybe 10 people. I'm making that up, but we were looking at it before we got here.
Okay.
But now I have more context of what you're asking for too. I think I will.
Okay.
But I think we looked at just speech language pathology the other day, and there's 24, right? Yeah.
But how many of those, I mean, I guess the question would be how many of them are already how many of them are already at the bottom? Because if they're already there, there's no place for them to move, right? So, if that makes sense. I don't know if it makes any difference or not, but I just, okay. Unless, anything else from the team? Did I forget to say anything? Okay. Then Article 45, this is also your proposal, and it is very largely exactly what you gave to us. The only difference is if you go to the last page that applies to Article 5, so it's Section 8, it's on the back of the second page. For insurance, Julie and I together believe that this group is separate as far as health insurance is separate from the group that the compensation proposal that we made last time would apply to. So in our compensation, our proposal, the proposal was for additional funding toward insurance in year 1. So if you look by insurance in Section 8, it changes the contribution, the monthly contribution toward the cost of healthcare from $100 to $150. I went back and looked, and it's been at $100, I believe, since the 1921 contract. So it's been sitting stationary for a bit. So that's the only change that I made to Article 45. So that's pretty straightforward. The 19 to 21, I think, was the. I've been here a long time too, Brandon, but not that long. All right. Then the next one is leave. And I was telling members who are new to the team that by the time we pass things back and forth a few times, things get super messy. So on the first page, it's Article 38, leave due to sickness or emergency. And as a team, we're at peace with the information that's on the front of there. If you turn to the back page under Article 39, I asked at the table last time, are you opposed to adding the definition for child for the school conference and activities leave? Because I do think there are going to be a lot of questions if we don't include that. Like, it's not required that it be included. The statute is there. But I put that definition back in. We talked a little bit about it, but I put that definition back in just because I think it clarifies things for people and hopefully alleviates the number of questions that come to member rights and HR by extension. Toward the bottom of that same page under Article 41, personal leave, if you go to Section I and then following Section I, there's that is underlined and italicized. And it says teachers who have been employed with Moorhead Area Public Schools for the word 10 should be struck as the number 10 is struck. So 15 years or more shall be credited with additional days to be used for personal business and be able to accrue days based on the table below, and then the table's at the top of the next page. So people who have been working for Moorhead Schools for 15 to 20 years, so not experience outside the district, but time in the district, 15 to 20 years would have one additional day and would be able to accrue to 6. So rather than, if you've been working here for 15 years, you start the year with 3 personal days added rather than 2. If you've been here 21 to 30 years, then you get 2 additional days and you can accrue to 7. If you have been here over 30 years, you get 3 additional days and you can accrue to 8. Okay, then I think that's the only thing that was changed under leave. The next page is Article 17. And in conversation, there has been a lot of conversation about equity. So teachers at Horizon sub for 43 minutes and get compensation for an hour. Teachers at Moorhead High sub for 85 minutes and get compensation for 1.5 hours. Teachers at the elementary sub their prep time, which is 60 minutes, and they get 60 minutes. And it's even more difficult for them to be able to sub just because of the way the elementary schedule runs. So this proposal is that any teacher who subs for 45 minutes gets the rate, the pay rate, BA step, BA 10 step, and then because the salary schedule changed, step 5, and they get 1 hour of comp time. So anyone who subs 45 minutes, doesn't matter what building they work in, gets 1 hour. And that's currently what the contract says for skinnies for the high school, which don't exist anymore. But also just kind of builds in some equity. And then that same table has been changed in Appendix I. So if you turn to the next page, and then look at item number 4. So a teacher is limited to earning 2 days of compensatory personal leave time per school year. Earned compensatory personal leave days must be taken in full day increments and may be carried over to the following year, but subject to the same accrual limits as other personal leave time. In other words, if I have 3 days and I have accrued 2 more and I sub and earn 2 more, I have to use them before the end of the year until I'm down to 5 because that's all I can carry over. So there's a limit to that. On that same document, if you look kind of right in the middle of the page, there's a note that says leave number 7, which is splitting of classrooms, and number 8, which is combining of classrooms, until after the work group meeting, which I think is scheduled for Tuesday. Because I think we want to honor the work that committee does and the feedback that they provide for splitting and doubling. So that is all on leave. Questions? Anything? Okay. The next one is Appendix B, and I'm going to show my age here a little bit because they don't have. You don't have, no, you don't have it because what I have is I have a copy of the district proposal and I have a copy of our proposal with highlights of the differences. And so you recommended that the homeless liaison be given 2 weeks of extended contract time at their individual contract rate in order to do the work that they need to. Same for special education coaches. We recommended that the AmeriCorps coordinator be added as well. And then on ours, an increase to summer school, to the curriculum study day and hour, and the addition of the $200 for those who serve on the continuing education committee. We are not opposed to what's on your proposal, but we don't know if you're opposed to what was on our proposal. So I just wanted to share that information, and then I don't know if you planned to counter. Okay. So, but I didn't do a proposal because it would seem like then we'd just end up passing across the table twice again.
You'll find we did the same thing, so that
Okay.
might come back later.
Okay, perfect. Then we go back to the packet again. So Appendix C is largely the same as the proposal. I think the only question we had is, it- did you confirm that is it? I think it's called pay or pays.
Yeah.
Pay, philanthropy and youth. Did you confirm that hasn't been an approved?
It has not been.
It has not been. Okay. So I think that was our only question as far as the activities that are listed on here. If you go to tournament competition, I added back in the line about payment being made, and there's a really specific reason that and it like if it is something that can be dealt with internally, and it's not necessary to have this here, but there were a number of activities and athletic coaches who participated in state level competition, finished their season in March. And when President Berg sent an email inquiring, they had not yet been paid on May 14th. And so I think it's pretty rare to do work and then have to wait that long in order to get paid for it. So it is a real problem for people. They've done work, they've invested the time, and so that's why that is back in. I also added back in the coach meal compensation. And the reason that I did that is because of some information that we're getting for coaches about extended competition time because of the expense for travel. So I'm going to use a specific example. Volleyball, I think, is traveling for a 3-day competition. So they are leaving on Thursday evening. So there would be the Thursday evening meal. They're going to be gone all day Friday. So that would be 3 meals. And they are returning on Saturday. So they're competing and at 2 different places. And they're doing that in order to save money spent on travel because of how far we have to go to travel now. So for those coaches, that's 6 meals that they have to pay out of pocket. And as a group, we just kind of feel like the compensation for coaching doesn't allow for that. And the understanding is that that's something that's going to be occurring more frequently because of the new level of competition that we're in. That's that one. And then, so that's it should say Appendix CD. And then the last one is for special education. And I shared some data earlier on. And the two members of the board who sit at the table asked a question about where our data came from. So we have a handout just to kind of shed some light on that a little bit. It's for both. Yep. So if you look at the top of this, 50 people responded to the survey. I think that was quite likely information that you had before. And you asked whether there was data gathered as far as specific schools. So this is a response in the first column. You can see the name of the school or the program, and then the number of staff who responded. And then there was a question about classroom visits. So that has also been included. So I think it's important to say that for early intervention services, those are some of our youngest learners who are coming into the school experience for the first time. And a certain number of them are dysregulated. And they also have two supervisors for that particular program. And they're both really active because, again, these are some of our earliest learners. And then, like, you can see down from there, and then you can see that west, there were a lot of supervisor classroom visits, and west was, how do I say this, a bit of a hot mess last year. And so the building administrators at that site said to their staff, don't put yourself in a place where you're going to get hurt. Call for help and we'll respond very quickly. So that was the case there. And then so that just gives you an idea.
Let me ask a clarifying question. on
Yeah,
the two.
absolutely.
Without seeing what the survey questions were, was it specific to supervisors, as in any supervisor, as in principal and LSS supervisor? Was it left open as supervisor? What is the question?
I believe the question was, and I can look, and I think the question probably is included on the handout that I gave you. It was like 2 sessions ago.
It was left open. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so it was, how many times did a supervisor visit you in your classroom? I think is, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was kind of the question. But again, I think you could look, and if you can't find it, let me know, and I'll send it to you. But yes. So there's that information, and then the memorandum of understanding. I feel like I need to provide some background because we have a couple of new people at the table, and you do as well. And I have to say that the special education work conditions is something that has been like a puzzle to try to, or a problem to solve. I don't know quite how to say it, a puzzle to put together ever since I started this work. And that was a few years ago. And we have tried a number of different approaches, and it seems like it'll work on paper, like it's going to provide the needed impetus to create change. And then people come back to us with the same concerns, which some of which you have already seen on the survey results. So this is yet another attempt. This memorandum of understanding is entered into between Moorhead Public Schools and Education Moorhead to address special education workload, caseload, and resulting burnout issues, bolster student learning and achievement, increase retention of special education and related service providers, and secure an educational environment conducive to effective instruction and learning for some of our most vulnerable student populations. And then for process, there are guidelines in Minnesota Rule 3525.2340, and there are some guidelines. Notice that it's a rule; it's not a law. And I'm saying that as much for people in the audience as I am for people at the table. It's a rule; it's not a law. And then, so there are guidelines for students who spend the majority of their day in a special ed setting. And then there's a second part that says that the district can set a policy for the workload for teachers, or excuse me, for teachers who work with students who spend less than 60% of their day in a special ed setting. And so those are both linked. If you were to look at the policy, essentially what it says is that the director of special education and administrators can set the caseload. So what's really concerning for us on behalf of our membership is that there are a number of people who responded to our survey who were never observed by an administrator, whether it was in special education or it was a building administrator. And it's really troubling. It's hard to understand how someone who has never been in the space can determine the appropriate workload or caseload for the people who are in that space every day. So, then again, trying to figure out, what do we do about that? How do we get the right people at the table to make decisions about that, or to make sure that the people who are at the table are informed about what the students and the teaching staff are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So, I do not in any way, shape, or form believe that this is a finished document. It's a stab at some ideas for how we could make this better. But again, I don't know if it'll work any better than what we did last time. So basically, number one says we're going to take into consideration the Minnesota rule, the student direct service minutes, the time that it takes for evaluation and reevaluation, screenings and assessments that are necessary for current levels, progress monitoring, et cetera, indirect services, management of IEPs, travel time, consulting with regular ed teachers in order to arrive at ways that students can remain in the most appropriate setting for their learning, planning and preparing for instruction, including co-teaching assignments, third-party billing, training and direction for paraprofessionals. I know that teachers are not supposed to supervise paraprofessionals, but they are often the people who train them on this is how you work with the student in order for them to be able to share their thoughts because they can't verbalize or that type of thing. I think I put third-party billing in there twice. I apologize. And then other services required in the IEPs of their students. Item number 2, including service providers, if they are in a position where they're overwhelmed by their caseload, is kind of what this comes down to. They're going to collect data. Like, what are the numbers? What are the hours? What's the time? When are you getting overwhelmed? What have you done to ask for help? Like that sort of thing. So collect data and then communicate with their program manager and their building administration regarding a workload, caseload concern. And I have to say that this is not for them to be passed back and forth, but for the administration to collaborate in supporting these individuals. regarding workload or caseload concern. Within 10 school days, the administrators involved will spend a minimum of 3 class periods observing the teacher. And this is not observation for evaluation. This is observation so that they have a good understanding of what the working conditions are for that person. Like, what is it like to be in that space? Ideally, those would be like times that would be chosen by the teacher. So the administrator will observe while they're providing instruction, and then the teacher and administrators will establish a written action plan to, number one, set priorities for the teacher time. So in the data, you saw that at times people have been told your priority is paperwork. Is that an impression, or is that something that they were really told? If it's in writing, everybody understands what the priority is. And then come up with solutions to alleviate the workload, caseload concerns. Number 3, with the support of a member rights advocate, educators and related service providers with concerns that remain unresolved for more than 10 school days may request a review of their workload or caseload with the Director of Human Resources. Sorry, Ashley. But really, this comes from when I was working as member rights advocate, went into a meeting with then HR Director Sue Winter, and we talked about what that person's day was like, what a typical day was like for them, and all of the things, all the plates that they were trying to keep spinning in the air. And to quote Sue Winter, she said, "What the hell?" And then she immediately set up in a meeting with the executive director of special education to try to get some movement. So, sorry, Ashley, but based on that experience, you're the person who maybe can.
Well, and
I don't know. Okay.
I mean, just from a process standpoint, you'd probably put human resources because generally we tag team.
Okay. So
it may be Ashley, it may be me.
okay. So then item number 4, I talked about this previously. All scheduled parent-teacher conference times become due process work time or trade time for special education and related service providers. I should have put in there that EIS would be the exception because they worked with their administrator to come up with a different solution because they really feel that at those early ages, they need to be at the table for those conferences to help parents understand and et cetera. In order to use conference time as trade time, all due process must be up to date at least 2 school days prior to scheduled conference dates. So it only becomes trade time if paperwork is all done. Otherwise, it's work time. You got to get your paperwork done up to date. It is not necessary to document that time since sped forms can be used to identify time worked outside the contract. That I have been told that administrators in special ed can see how much time people are spending outside the contract day. If the administration, program manager, or building administrator wants a teacher to attend, they can request attendance and compensate the teacher at their contracted rate of pay for the time. Item number 5, those working as special education teachers or related service providers will be added to Appendix B, extended contract for 1 week for due process time spent during the year and summer transition work. Number 6, the executive director of special education supervisors will survey those working in their programs and develop a professional development plan for the 25-26, 26-27 school years to provide quality professional development specific to special education. When I talked about that previously, Kristen, you mentioned, maybe that could be part of a larger. The professional development committee has not been active in the last few years. Maybe it's a recommendation that becomes part of that
Yeah, I think our intention was not to resurrect that committee, but to have their own specific committees
Okay,
drive on making some of those decisions.
okay. Um, and then the executive director and special education supervisors develop and deliver training on the crisis response plan and its associated systems, including process, the what and the how for intake, transition for students, as well as classroom observations and feedback for all teachers on an annual basis. And that is specifically, I remember one area of concern that Cassidy mentioned specifically was those people for whom there was a crisis and there was no long-term solution identified for that. So we want to make sure that people have the training to keep themselves and their students safe in a situation. And I'll stop talking now.
Could I just have you clarify, just one thing? I didn't catch it all. When we're talking about, section 6 or whatever, the special education, professional development, you're looking at having special or PD specifically for that? I just took my notes. I want to make sure I get it correct.
Yeah, we had talked
Thank you.
2 or 3 sessions ago, I think, about this, about the previous MOU and what was really needed out of that MOU. And there was some discussion about um, creating creating a committee of some supervisors, potentially Dwayne, and some teachers to make sure that we identify what they needed for professional development or support and have some direction because we'd previously been having those meetings that were scheduled and 75% of them, according to the data, was like, nope, no help needed, no help needed, no. So it became meeting to meet and not meeting to solve. And so, how did we focus that work?
Thank you.
Mhm. That's my recollection from probably July.
Yeah, now that you say that, I think we also talked about a work group that Superintendent Lunick had pulled together specifically for DCD. And so just expanding that work group.
Okay. Here's ours. There's one extra for your crew in the crowd. They want to come grab it. I'm sorry. And then I have to see if I have my own. How about that? I think I have it. Um, okay. So some of ours are just updates today. We talked a little bit about Appendix I. That team meets on next Tuesday, and that consists of some teacher representation from elementary. The elementary principals, Dr. Jeremy Larson, and Ashley Evans will be a part of that group, and that's to have a conversation substitute coverage. But we also talked a little bit about problem solving for substitutes and leave as a whole in addition, because there's some, you can solve the substitute coverage, but if your need for substitutes continues to go up, you can't cover no matter how much you try. So that has to be part of the conversation too. And thank you to Sarah who sent some talking points so they have a place to start. FlexTime PLC, you mentioned it as well. We were just going to update that EIS had met with their supervisor, created a plan without supervision and on their own, meaning Karen and I were not there. They just went ahead and did that. So I just wanted to update that. Appendix B, I think our team was thinking the same as yours. We didn't bring Appendix B. So I think just in response to some of the discussion that you had, if we had brought today, there are a couple of things in response. Summer school, it can be increased, but there's an effect. There's a consequence to that. And a consequence to that is the amount of money we have towards running those programs, which can mean an increase in number of kids. An increase in number of kids per classroom, or so we have to be aware of that. So in general, we were not in support of that, but we just want to bring that up. And that's in a conversation I had with Dr. Larson's department today as well. And to that point, curriculum, there's not a concern in potentially raising it slightly, but to keep that in mind too. So if we bring that back, we would counter with an increase to that. And then AmeriCorps, generally teaching and learning, was not in favor of that, partially because of the job and because it's not in a classroom and it's partially coaching, partially directing, and there is some flexibility within the job already. And then I think the last one is continuing ed, and we're not in favor of committee members getting a stipend, partially because the committee is identified by statute, and our committee and the individuals from the buildings who support that is much larger than what statute requires, which requires so many teachers, so many administrators, and outside individual to do that work. So. Just some of the discussion we're having about Appendix B, but I know that was a response in some of the discussion here today. So then in our packet today, along with Appendix B, Karen, to be fair, Karen and Dr. Lunanek and I had a discussion about this in particular. In that third-party billing, I think we'll just keep wrapping ourselves around it instead of being able to move what we think might be appropriate into that appendices. So this is just a start, but looking at, and I know more committees, but how do we identify what is not necessarily the appropriate stipend, but how it should be divided? And it might be that more is requested, but I think what we saw in some of that data is we've got certain groups who do a significant amount of third-party billing. You've got certain groups that might do, 5 entries a year, and they're all getting the same stipend. Kind of is some of the concern. The other thing I think for us in Appendix B is just making sure that that stipend isn't getting paid out until someone confirms the work has been done. So there was a section that we added in Appendix B that we would request stay. And then looking over the next 2 years to say, hey, the people who are involved should come together and have a conversation about what that looks like, and potentially bringing in our person who did that job for a long time to support the new person to make some of those recommendations. And this group can make the decision, when we come back to the table about if we can make that adjustment or what those recommendations look like. I think we could make recommendations. I just don't know that they would be the right ones in settling the contract. I think we need other people's eyes on them. And that's what, in fairness, we talked about. So this is just a starting point to discuss what maybe we can go next on that. And then we have our own C&D, but there's some things that you added that we will have to discuss. So I won't review this. It just included the National Honor Society, which had been left off last time. And we will discuss what you presented today as well.
As you talk about that,
Mm-hmm.
I forgot something. So, on our proposal, under the teachers, coaches, activity advisors, driving students, so the way that the second paragraph reads, it's on should a teacher, coach, or activity advisor undertake the responsibility of operating a district for an event outside the district, the individual will be compensated at the hourly rate of $22.50. Drivers in this situation will be paid for all time spent driving. On our version, we added an hour because of the pre-departure and post-arrival inspections that I believe are required, and bus drivers typically get that time. So that was, I had to see this in order to remember that.
Okay.
An additional question. So there was a line that the district removed. The stipend will be paid to head and assistant coaches based on the percentage assigned as defined by Appendix D. We weren't sure what that meant, so we're not sure what it means for that to be removed.
Yeah, there's always been some confusion about the calculation in general. Probably part of the issue with this language as a whole, and what makes getting paid by the second pay period has been difficult in how it's been addressed. So I don't know that the percentage has been applied appropriately, so I don't know that we could tell you, since it was the first contract we had done, and I think there were some stumbles on trying to figure out how to apply that language. So
Okay,
it doesn't necessarily, it's one stipend, so it's not going to affect from a costing perspective because you're still looking at 3 times this many times this. So the stipend is finite. It's how it's applied but if that makes sense.
okay. So is there a difference in what the head coach, assistant coaches receive as part of that?
I would have to look at the document.
Okay. Just because I mean, I think the idea was that people want to be able to calculate what it would be.
I think we talked about that language being confusing and it needed to be better identified for payment.
Okay.
Was part of that. Okay. And multiple people looked at it and said, what exactly does that mean?
And for clarification, I believe that when we heard from various coaches of activities and athletics, the response was that when they inquired a couple of months later, the response that they received was that they would they would try to begin working on that soon. So I think the perception was that it wasn't something that had even been potentially begun to figure out the pay rate and whether or not they would be paid or when.
Well, I think they all got paid. I think there continues to be confusion around the language of when and how it was paid. And the other thing that has consistently happened is you have got some groups with a lot of coaches who went, who didn't, who stopped. That there's a lot of moving pieces that I think every year causes confusion with extracurricular. Even to the point where I think Ashley and her team could tell you that we can be completely done with a season and we have someone trickling in telling us they were coaching. And that is not always on the administration because sometimes we across the board are not aware.
Shouldn't there be a contract for that coach? I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise that someone's a coach, right? They shouldn't be trickling in.
It shouldn't be a surprise if they're placed on the spreadsheet when coaches are asked to give us all of their coaches.
That's fair.
Yeah. There's a lot of human error in the process that I wish there wasn't.
Contracts are
Yeah.
a great thing. That's
What,
let us know if we
and
get paid.
and generally, yeah, generally you get one out of HR with signatures on it, and there have been times those have gone out late because we haven't received the.
One of those would be mine from the spring. Sorry. I didn't sign my contract right away.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So now you know there's human error involved across a lot of people.
100%.
Okay. Okay. So memorandum of understanding, student behavior and teacher safety. This is our counter. No changes on the first page. Second page, we really felt we wanted to direct this more towards problem solving and not problem finding. And so when we looked at the language, and I talked to Dr. Larson a little bit as well on this, or I asked him for his opinion. So if he didn't provide it completely, it was asked. But so a couple things. When we look at committee makeup, there was a feeling that yes, parents and students would be important, but also the committee should maybe have a discussion and at what time that should happen. Because when starting a committee, what are our drives? What are we addressing? Where are the issues? And we tried to kind of redo that language into that. So it says it may include the addition of a parent to or two 712 students. The committee will meet. We moved from monthly to quarterly because, in truth, sometimes data takes longer than we'd like it to, and we should look at that in a period of time and look to discuss the following. One being identify needs for consistent data collection. Is it being collected consistently? Is it being collected consistently across buildings? Where do we need to problem solve that needs to get done? Reviewing data collected from each program or building, and that so we can identify themes or areas of concern based on collected data. This can also include targeted recommendations for need or support for individual buildings or programs. And then recommendations of action steps for problem solving. Who's responsible for the action steps and follow through of committee membership. Again, that might be, hey, Joe never puts action steps when someone comes to their office, right? That's part of the discussion of we're struggling with this building, we're not getting feedback. And then who in the committee is responsible to follow up, or what information is coming out of that discussion that requires follow up before the next meeting. And then subsequent meetings will provide follow up on identified problem solving and action steps of those individuals. And then, of course, the date and time of next meeting. We wanted to clarify that, yes, this would be a meet and confer item, but also just wanted to clarify language because generally the meet and confer item as a standing item, our meet and confer has been shared with the whole school board because that has been requested previously. We think that was the intent. I just wanted to clarify in the language that the intent was that they would see that information. And then conclusion 26, 27, those are the changes we present today on that. Any questions?
Questions from the crowd are probably, when do we eat?
Is there food too or just ice cream?
I think there's pizza and ice cream. That's tough to beat.
To be
Kind of is.
yeah, to grab something way out.
After
I I I, I think so. I might take it up. I don't know. What do you? Nope, we're not done. No.
Don't tell me.
No. What are you thinking about for?
Well, we have a district compensation response.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It is.
Sorry.
Okay. So, I think it goes without saying we're in a. No, there's no handout. Nope. Historically, we've presented a number and we've presented either a percentage or a monetary amount without any other cost to it, because we also recognize that sometimes it's helpful to sit down, research in business to look at what we have and what that can look like, and sometimes there does need to be some creativity. Again, I think it goes without saying that we know the district is in a tough spot from a budgetary standpoint, and I'd like, we'd like you to. We're just acknowledging that as we present. And so, from a board perspective, we have been approved to 6%. 6% looks like 1.5% across the salary schedule on step one and year one, and 1.5% in year two. And again, that's percentages because generally we've run percentages. That's been the preference. We could run straight dollar amounts. And as we've done in the past, I do think it's helpful when we can have two heads together to kind of look at some of those numbers. As I know we know you presented yours last time, and this is what we bring you today. I will say, like, there's some, we've talked about some monetary pieces in our presentations that aren't in this, and that we need to be aware of that, which is again sometimes why the details come out at other times. But that's what we have today.
See? Just kidding.
You don't turn on. We've got a lot to talk about, so I would say we will check in with you at 6:30, maybe. I know there's just we've got a couple language pieces and a couple areas to look at. Thank you. Uh,
Does it really matter?
I don't know that it really matters. We talked about Appendix B. These are some of the things we talked about. There's nothing new outside of the things that we referenced, but that's copies of it, and multiple of them to spread out as you see fit. We, in some of these cases, just need to have more discussion. Some of it we need to find data. Some of it will be providing counters, but we are ready to sign off on Article 45 with your to group insurance for that group of people. I have one copy, so I don't know if anyone else has another copy. Me too. It's okay.
Oh. See, this is.
Brittany Q.
Yeah, that's.
Um, I, I don't have an answer for you about dates yet, but we're going to talk about it when we go back in, about the possible dates that you shared. And then, we, um, you said that oh, okay. So on your proposal, what you're proposing at this point is for MA billing, that the $1,000, 300 carry.
We just left it the same.
Okay.
We have our responses there to curriculum and then the additional two that we had added. And then language just to state that those stipends on MA won't be paid out until the third party billing kind of gives it her check stamp of approval twice a year, with the understanding of the MOU for a potential committee. So they really go hand in hand, but because we talked about it, we wanted to present you with what we had chatted about
Okay.
and before going to caucus.
Okay. Anybody else have any?
I'll share that, Michelle. I haven't shared it yet.
Okay. We adjourn at 7:01.
I can.
Try now, yeah.
You didn't have it before?
Yeah, I gotta get the work done. You're supposed to enjoy what's.
But we are
around you and
officially
everybody around
canceling the
you, and
23rd, right?
coffee thing is not the
We are officially canceling the 23rd.